Stream it saying.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first edition of Series 2 of Your Life, Your Voice. We're now live on Facebook. I apologise for technical issues that we had earlier on.
Stream it saying.
Okay. I'd like to welcome to our first edition of Series 2 of Your Life, Your Voice. We're now live on Facebook. I apologise for
I think we're live. I've just stopped the stream.
We are live.
Yes.
I'm not sure why the echo is happening. Anyway, so have you stopped it, there?
What I've done is I've stopped the. I've unmuted.
Okay. Okay. How about we just continue and see what transpires. So welcome to Series 2 of 2021 of Your Life, Your Voice. I think it's cleared itself now. Welcome, Cathy. Dear me, I think our computers are still on the COVID break. So it looks as though all the errors have cleared up now, and we're recording. So we're live on YouTube. Yay! Congratulations, everyone. So anyway, welcome, Cathy, to our first interviewee for this year. Cathy is from a Neighbourhood House, a coordinator for Neighbourhood House. And Gulea, would you like to conduct the interview?
Thank you. First, I'd like to chat about neighbourhood houses in Victoria. They were established in the late 1970s, actually 1979, is the peak body for the neighbourhood house sector, the Neighbourhood Houses Victoria. The Victorian Neighbourhood House movement was born in the early 1970s by trailblazing women who wanted to get away from the kitchen sink and create opportunities to make meaningful change in their communities. It was a Whitlam-era Australia with dramatic social change, which led to health and community services being delivered more as a social right of all people rather than as a charitable duty. The movement grew from the grassroots out of the local community need, particularly the isolation of women in the community, with a vision to bring people together and enhance the opportunities of people and communities. Another initial emphasis was to provide an informal, non-threatening and nurturing environment that supported individualised learning, the adult community education. So thank you, Julie, for introducing us. As we said, we have Cathy Cannop, the manager of Farnham Street Neighbourhood Learning Centre, joining us today. Welcome, Cathy. Could you tell us about the centre, Farnham Street, its history, goals, aims and objectives, and the programs you run?
Hi, Gulea. I've been at Farnham Street since 1989. We have a history here of people staying for a very long time. I've been here the second longest because the people who work here are very committed to making that change in their community and to recognise and identify needs that arise and, work together to provide programs that address those needs. But Farnham Street actually started as Flemington Neighbourhood House in 1979 with the same sort of history as you've just previously discussed. There were some trailblazing women in our community. We were back then a part of the City of Melbourne, who were also a very progressive council and were very committed to, funding what they saw as very good community development activities. So it started in 1979. It was actually a shop front in Racecourse Road in Flemington, the main shopping area. Basically had some activities. There were bread making, sewing. There were some literature courses. There was childcare. And there was also a very strong collective that ran the centre. So the people from sort of all walks of life in the Flemington area, going from people who were actually very educated in quite sort of good positions themselves, down to people who lived in the high-rise flats who hadn't had the same sort of opportunities that they'd had. So it was very much a sort of movement that was led by people who had those sort of not just social skills, but had that those education and enterprising backgrounds to bring about some of those social changes. Through the 80s, there was a first migrant women's English program was started in 1984, as well as the adult VCE program. So most of these activities and programs were designed to give people opportunities that they wouldn't have had previously, so that they could get into education and sort of further their careers and sort of really improve their quality of life. Over the years, and it's a long time now, we had our 40th anniversary the year before. I've forgotten about COVID, we had skipped a year. But over the time, our migrant English program grew enormously, and we also always had a very big focus on people who had a disadvantage of some sort, a recognised disadvantage, and they had those barriers to learning and barriers to social support. So that's the core focus of Farnham Street, is to provide opportunities for learning, participation and engagement in a socially supportive environment.
Yeah,
Can I just ask a follow-up question? And with the learning opportunities for people with disabilities, I know that there's been a whole lot of work done around different styles of learning. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that, Cathy? How the Neighbourhood Houses has evolved around these topics and issues around different learning styles, perhaps. And that Easy English has been around, I'm not sure for how long. I don't think it was around in the 80s, or it might have been around the 80s. Could you elaborate a little bit more about that?
So more in terms of disability?
Yes.
Yeah, well, we've always had a focus as one of the groups that we identify in this community are people with disabilities, either physical or intellectual. And we would also say psychiatric disability, or people with lived experience of mental illness. So back in 1993, we started our first program for people with, as I said, with the lived experience of mental illness. I had a background in psychiatric nursing, and around 93 was the time of the deinstitutionalisation process. So there were people living in our community, with a range of disabilities who needed to be integrated into the programs that we ran. I guess what we saw as mainstream was not maybe what other bigger institutions saw as mainstream. We saw that everybody deserved the opportunity to be involved, to access those educational and support activities in a sort of a way that suited them. So we were always very mindful that people with, and I'll maybe focus a little bit on our mental health, the big mental health program, because that's been a very long-term program here. We realised that there were people who were no longer living in institutions, who were living in the local community, and often suffered that stigma that goes with mental illness. Their opportunities for participation in a whole range of areas had been probably compromised by their mental illness, the episodic nature of their illness, having to leave jobs often, or being alienated by friends and family who perhaps didn't have that understanding. So it was a very key focus for us to recognise that they were just people who needed support to be able to, access some other opportunities that would improve their quality of life. So initially, when this need was identified back in the early 90s, I approached a local psych disability support service and asked them to sort of work with us to try to sort of develop programs that would be appealing for people, that would recognise the nature of their illness, not necessarily even a disability, but the fact that, they might need to come to class and then not come to class. So we worked with teachers here for the programs we ran to train them up to understand that people would maybe have these barriers and maybe not be able to participate in sort of a more mainstream way. So we've been developing those programs, what's that now, nearly 28 years, and we seem to be a leader in the field in the mental health area. We also have, all along the way, we always worked with those other service providers in the local area who were specific mental health providers, the Waratah Mental Health Services, Norfolk Terrace Community Care Unit, Arion Park, which is a sort of just a transition from hospital back into the community. We've got the Boomerang Network that they were part of the Boomerang Club in Moonee Ponds. Some of their participants also came to programs here, but when the Boomerang Club closed, I asked them to relocate here. So they meet here every Tuesday afternoon. I write funding submissions for them. We sort of do a bit of an intake process where we try and ascertain what needs people have, what sort of programs that we have. And it's the wonderful art program that Gulair runs, which is very well attended. And Gulair obviously has the skills and the knowledge, the expertise and the understanding to work very passionately with the people in the class to get the best out of them, to provide a very important sort of meeting place for them here. But we also recognise Farnham Street as a focal point in our local community for everyone, but we do really focus especially in the disability area. We also have people with intellectual disabilities, quite a number who come to our life skills programs, to the gardening program, to the choir, to Gulair's program. Even within the English program, there are a number of people from different multicultural groups, some of them who don't have the same recognition of mental illness that we might have, and we try in a way to educate them, to link them into the services, the other mental health services that we deal with. But first and foremost, we recognise them as people who have needs that we can provide, and we can provide support for those needs. That's our fundamental reason for being.
Yeah, sorry, Gulair. Sometimes the answers drift into the questions, as you realise.
Yeah.
So we try and make it as conversational as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So we've touched on engagement of the disability called clients or participants. Is there anything else, Gulair, you'd like to add to the conversation?
Yeah, I was thinking around how we would see the future of Farnham Street Neighbourhood Learning Centre, and how people can volunteer and get involved with such an amazing organisation.
Well, we have our volunteer program here. My colleague Robbie Cottrell is the volunteers coordinator. We see volunteering as a very key focus of what we do as well, because in areas like Flemington, you get a lot of people who are, nowadays, it's become quite a gentrified area. So we have a lot of people who are sort of in a sort of higher socioeconomic bracket. They're quite well educated. They, financially, they're quite well off. But a lot of those people want to give back. And there's a lot of people, so in areas like Flemington, where you get a bit of a polarised community from sort of quite wealthy down to people, in transitional housing, people living in the high-rise flats. We also run a refugee youth mentoring program. So most of the volunteers are people in that first category who see that they have, done well in life, and they want to be able to, give something of themselves back to the community to improve the lives of people who are not as advantaged as them. And that works really well. We have so many, we've actually I keep saying last year, we didn't really last year because it didn't really happen much, but the year before we actually had 50 volunteers across all the programs, which is probably about as many as we can handle at the moment. But all of those people, really contribute so much of their time. Some of them help out in the disability cooking classes. Quite a lot do the one-on-one conversation with the English students. People volunteer obviously on our committee. We have all the refugee youth mentors. So volunteering is a big part of what we do, and we never have any trouble getting volunteers.
Yeah. I'm also wondering with those volunteers, they're the more well off. What about people who do live in the flats? Do they get involved with the neighbourhood centre as well?
Yeah, a lot of people actually come for programs, and we've had people in some of the higher level English classes who then mentor people in the lower level English classes. And that's a very good, it's great for them because they really feel like they're, helping people, and, whose English is not as good as theirs. And it's very important, obviously, the better English skills people have, um, just the more they're able to sort of get ahead in their community. I mean, it's hard to get a job if your English levels are low. Some people have good spoken English, but their reading and writing is quite low. A lot of people say to us, look, we speak English when we come here, but when we go home, we speak in our own language. So we really need to have, those people who can have the conversations with us so we can improve our English. I think it just makes you more empowered if you can speak the dominant language and you can, read and write in the dominant language. It opens up a lot more opportunities for you.
I also recall someone being a journalist in their country and then not having the language skills in English to continue their profession.
We have so many people. It's just extraordinary, really. People who come here from other countries and especially, people who've come from terrible situations overseas and they've been in refugee camps or their families have been murdered, like really awful, terrible, war-torn countries. And they're so educated in their own country and they can't get a job here. And that's something that we obviously find very distressing, and they do as well. So to improve their level of English and have those people who can also support them outside of the classroom is incredibly important. We also work with some of the employment networks, the Brotherhood of St Lawrence in the area. They have an employment program. So we link people in with as many programs as we can, but we try and do as much at this end to, improve their skills so that, like say helping them with writing resumes, helping them look for jobs, just helping them within our computer program, helping people use their MyGov account, which is, I find, very difficult to use. So I can imagine if your English isn't your first language, it would be even harder. So we try and sort of do what we call the wraparound services, giving people as much support as we can to certainly to improve their lives and overcome some of those, awful, terrible obstacles they face.
Yeah. Talking about last year, a bit of the COVID lockdown, how have your programs operated, Cathy, and what kind of adjustments did you have to make with COVID-19?
Well, we had to get onto Zoom very quickly. It's amazing how quickly we were able to get onto Zoom. That's because we obviously have people working here with some very good tech skills. And Goulia, I know you ran your art class by Zoom, which was great. We did run a number of classes on Zoom, and we also, with the English classes, we had our education packs that we actually sent out. Some people came and picked them up from here, and then the teachers followed them up. We had a big social contact plan too. So across all the programs here, we made sure that nobody, was going to be isolated, that everybody would have somebody who was keeping in contact with them. So I made sure that I allocated to every group. All the teachers had their classes, but every teacher, every person, like the Boomerang Network, Shane Evans, the president, he was amazing. In fact, he told me he rang up some guy so much that this guy told him to stop calling. But we really wanted to make sure that nobody was left out. So, we really kept in contact with all of our participants. And when we could, I organised some people to have some food parcels delivered to them through the local Baptist church. I did some driving and delivered some myself. So everybody here pitched in, and I think we did a really good job of making sure that everybody was connected during that time.
So could I ask the phone number if someone wants to be able to be in touch? And
Oh, certainly. It's
yeah.
we're located at 28 Farnham Street in Flemington, and as you know, Goulia, we're very lucky to be in a beautiful location. We've got a lovely old I'm sure the Victorian Edwardian building. We're next to a beautiful park I'm just looking out at. We've got a beautiful community garden and a food forest. So we're very lucky to have such a beautiful physical location, and we're always very welcoming to anyone who'd like to drop in. But we're also contactable by phone on 9376 9088. And we welcome everyone. So anyone who'd like to be involved in some programs here, we'd be more than happy for you to come in.
So just going back to some of the points you've raised, Cathy, in terms of the professions that people did in their homeland, and the lack of opportunity in Australia to transfer those skills. I mean, I've met doctors that have been doctors in their, respective countries and all sorts of professionals. What would you like to say to, if someone governs listening, or the powers that be listening, what sort of message would you like to send about trying to use people to the best, get the best out of people, get the best ability out of people, and because we have shortages of skilled people, professionals, doctors, and all sorts of areas. So I think it's a good opportunity for Australia to see beyond people's countries, and maybe provide some sort of training or opportunity so people can be engaged in their chosen field in Australia. So I think there's quite a bit of there's an opportunity there, I think, for Australia to make those linkages. What would you like to say about that?
Oh, well, what have I got? Well, I just think that some of the tests that need to be sat are too difficult. We had a guy who was a doctor from Vietnam, and he sat that test through the Australian Medical Association, and it was just ridiculous. It was so hard, and yet they were crying out for, especially in the western suburbs, they were crying out for doctors, especially doctors who spoke Vietnamese, because of the big Vietnamese population. So I think from some of those sort of peak bodies that are very sort of dominated by Anglo, well, probably men, I guess, mainly, just to take into consideration the backgrounds, the qualifications people have, and don't make some of those tests so hard. Just be more aware of what's needed in the community, and and also by stopping people who have the qualifications from getting into work. He actually disadvantages the whole community, not just that particular person. And I also think, I come from a country town myself, and I know that there are some programs, to doctors, if they do a 10-year placement, they'll, get their qualifications and their citizenship. So I think that's really good too. I think there can be a lot of opportunities for people from other countries in country towns, and I think it's great for those country towns themselves to, see, especially those ones that are very monocultural. I think it's really great to have people coming into those towns from a lot of other countries. It sort of changes the whole sort of makeup of the town, and I think it's a very good experience for people on both sides.
Yes, so I was just thinking, I have gremlins in my head sometimes. I keep on thinking about things. And I know that we don't want to pigeonhole anyone in the community, but having said that, just say there's a high population of Vietnamese in the western suburbs, say. And I know that this may sound a little bit controversial, but maybe like having doctors to service the Vietnamese community, and maybe encouraging doctors to like improve their English skills throughout that process to like service a community a large community that's in need. I know that it's a bit like thinking out of the box, but I think that sometimes when things like go haywire, like with COVID, it's an opportunity to think out of the box, I think. So I don't know. I know there'll be problems in terms of, we don't want to like stereotype people or pigeonhole people or, have those pockets that only service Vietnamese or, no Australians. But I don't know. What do you think about that idea, Cathy?
Look, I think there's always, opportunities for thinking outside the box. And I think that's what COVID has really shown. It's really highlighted, so many areas in our society that, especially, those who are advantaged and those who are disadvantaged, it's become quite obvious, especially people, say, who don't have access to technology. They were really disadvantaged. And, now that people are, some people have done incredibly well financially out of COVID and other people haven't. So I think any sort of opportunity to sort of even up the score is what I think is incredibly important, to try and make sure that we all, we all either suffer or benefit at the same rate. I know that's one of those big, issues that, from ever since time began, I suppose. How do you address some of those imbalances that really come to the fore when something like a pandemic occurs? But I think good ideas, different ideas are always important, to make sure that, people are connected, people have opportunities, people can, barriers to learning and engagement in society are broken down as much as possible.
Would you like to add to that conversation, Colleen, at all?
Yeah, I was thinking around how well networked the Farnham Street is in terms of people going there. It's always a hive of activity. Like, it's just amazing. And I also feel that you've had a lot of input by local politicians and state politicians, and a lot of people coming in. I'm just wondering, is there like a generational issue there? Like, if people are from a, non-English speaking background, what happens to their children and their levels of literacy and numeracy? And, I'm thinking on that rate, because they wouldn't be able to be supported as much.
We've sort of really focused over the years on family literacy. So, there was, over COVID, it became quite obvious a lot of people couldn't help their children with homework. They couldn't actually teach them at home. Some people could, of course, but that was another big area that was highlighted, that if you don't have good English skills, good IT skills, you have to try and to be able to support your children at home is almost impossible. And we actually had some volunteers, and we had a story just published in our local Ken News local paper recently about one of the volunteers. She didn't only just work with her English student here, the mother. She actually worked with the whole family, and she gave her time to helping those kids. It would have been so difficult. I can't even imagine having to have done that myself. Tried to work from home and tried to, homeschool my kids. Every time I think of it, I think how lucky I feel that my kids have grown up and I didn't have to do that during COVID. So I think that's the thing, really trying to look at, we sort of, as I said, see literacy, it's a whole family issue, because the higher the literacy skills of the parents are, the higher the literacy skills of the children will be. So that's something we've focused on over a long period of time.
So I live in the western suburbs of Melbourne, and when I went to school, the school I went to was a public school, and there were lots of immigrant children, first generation, which I'm one of them. And over time, with the fall of cyclone, I'm pretty sure it's cyclone, there's been lots of Vietnamese people, students, and that would be first generation. And the actual school, the public school I went to, because the Vietnamese have a high place a high reliance on education, whereas the immigrants of post-war, uh, I come from a Maltese background, and the Maltese background in general, uh, they didn't really place a high value of education on their children. They did become, a lot of them became tradies, very good tradies. But what I've found over the decades is that the Vietnamese population that attends this school, they lifted up the ATAR level. It's a very educated public school now because of the focus on education by the Vietnamese parents. But having said that, there's lots of pressure on the children. I've been doing work in this area for quite a while now, and like a lot of first generation immigrants in Australia, there's lots of reliance on things that that are practical. Like a lot of Vietnamese students, the parents wanted to go to dentistry or doctor or be a doctor, or those really high level areas of education. And I had a student that I worked with a few years ago. She had a passion for writing, but the parents didn't put value on that. So it's a really cultural dilemma when the student wants to has a passion for something, and there's lots of pressure on the child to become what the parents want them to become. And this particular high school I went to have a English. They have education. I think they have language classes on the weekend. So and if you drive past on a Sunday morning, where a lot of Aussie students are like at sport, the Vietnamese population are learning Vietnamese. So there's a cross-cultural type of issue there or dilemma there. So yes, I suppose the question is, how do we educate ethnic groups about issues around choice and control, which is a big thing in the area I work in, for people with disabilities and all people really, because if you don't have choice and control in your life, down the road, you may feel like you've been left out, and you haven't followed your passion in life. And it could cause lots of issues around anxiety and not reaching your full potential, or not having the opportunity to express what you want to express in life. I don't know. What do you ladies think about this issue I've brought up?
Gule, do you want to?
I'm trying to think because it's quite complex being first generation person from who's doing everything, and I think it could be like that, but there's also lots of opportunities that are available if you take them up as well. So it's got to come within the person, but also supported in the community, like organisations like the one like Farnham Street as well. I'm thinking in schools, having that link between. I worked in a neighbourhood house in country Victoria, and what happened was the the neighbourhood house was integral to the community in every which way, from serving morning breakfast to supporting the children to being able to study adult learning style that neighbourhood houses have, that sort of thing I'm thinking.
So I think that neighbourhood houses in general are in a good position to educate the older people that come into the centre on these sort of things in life. I think it's a really good opportunity. So I don't know, Cathy. Do you think that? What do you think about having some sort of educational resource or sessions on these specific topics?
Yeah, well, we certainly notice here, just for example, in Asian culture, just how important education is. At the local high school, back through the 80s and 90s, when it was sort of a more disadvantaged school, they still got the top VCE student every year because the student was Vietnamese. Most of them lived in the high-rise flats, but that's part of Asian culture. Like, education to them is everything. I think probably with the post-war migration, Greek and Italian in particular, there was a very big focus on work. You know, there was, if you could work, that was the focus, to work as hard as you can to get ahead that way. We noticed with some of the Muslim cultures, it's religion's the most important thing. So you sort of get an idea of different cultures and what those cultures value the most. And I think there's a big part of me that respects that. You know, I grew up in a Catholic family. My parents were very strict Catholics. I mean, even though education was important to them too, religion was very important. So maybe not as much in the next generation. So I think things change. Like, I think with the first generation, like my mother went to university in 1948. She came from a very working class family, and she was the only one they sort of knew of that went to uni. So she had a very strong focus on education, but in her family, it was more important to work. And so my father's family as well, they're a very working class family. His father had died in the war. So the importance for them was getting it, you know, to try and survive more than anything after the Depression and the war. But work was very important. So I've sort of had the you know, got to work hard and, you know, respect your religion. So religion, like, I think even if you look at Australian culture, there's still very different areas of Anglo-Australian culture. In the town I grew up in, working was more important than education. Very few people went on to year 12. We only had 30 in our year 12, because if you were going on to university, you left at the end of year 10. So even though I come from that sort of background where work was important, religion's important. So I understand. And even with some of the African groups, you notice even the difference between the Christian and the Muslim cultures. The Christian Africans tend to have a bit more of a focus on education, but the Muslim Africans they have a very big focus on religion. So I understand that. I understand that work, coming from work and education and religion. So I think that cultures sort of change, multicultural communities change each other. And generations change. I'm wondering about the next generation, you know, around here won't be like a lot of the people who started out living in the high-rise flats in Flemington have moved. Their kids all be, especially the Asian, the Vietnamese in particular, their kids are all so highly educated now, and they've moved out of Flemington, they've moved to other areas. So I think sort of change happens anyway, and it's a generational thing at times as well. But yes, I do sometimes worry about the pressure that's put on kids. We also had a very big focus on, in a country town, on sport. Everybody played sport, so physical exercise was also very important. And I think a balanced life for everybody, you know, across all those areas is probably the ideal. But, you know, you also have to respect that other cultures may not have exactly the same idea that you have as to what's important.
That's absolutely respected in the field of disability and coming from a coal background and a working class background. I mentioned that I'm from a Maltese background, and so but in that time of the 50s, the Greek populations and the Italian populations had more of an emphasis on education, a lot of them, than the Maltese population. If you consider the actual population of Malta is 400,000, which is equivalent or more in Australia to about 400,000 plus. So post-war was really difficult in Europe. They had to rebuild. Formal education, I don't think, was a big priority for post-war immigrants in Australia. But I do know of some very famous Maltese people that have sort of like made their mark in around the world. One is Edward de Bono. I don't know whether you know Edward de Bono, who actually is in Oxford Dictionary as a founder of lateral thinking. Some not so. I'd like to disown some other Maltese heritage people like Rolf Harris for reasons that we know of, and also apparently Britney Spears has a Maltese connection. Her great grandparents. So back in the day, yes. So they were. Oops, we did it again, and they sort of like had the bit of the Britney attitude of not being married and being pregnant. So yes, so there are lots of things that happen cross-culturally, and like you said, cultures affect each other or have a lasting change in the culture. However small it is, I believe it does continue through generations. And I've seen that happen. So, Gulea, would you like to add to that conversation?
Yeah, I was thinking a lot about empowerment and self-empowerment and empowerment within the culture and the communities and, across cultures. That area would be something that we all work on together in our personal lives, in our work lives, in our study life. I feel that that's a key, that there are those opportunities here. And I'm thinking, Cathy, that would probably be one of the main aims at Farnham Street as well, in everything that you do there. That's the crux of it, is to foster and nurture people's growth and communities' growth, and yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's a real priority. And like, I live in the local area. I just live 5 minutes away, I moved to Flemington in 1982. So I'm so used to living and working in a very multicultural area. And I think I've learned so much about other people's cultures. It's, when I think back to when I first moved to this area, what I've learned about so many cultures and practices has just been enormous. And I feel it's been an incredibly valuable thing, coming from a country town where it's a very, very Anglo population. There's a small Aboriginal population and a smaller Italian community and then an even smaller Greek community, but basically a very monocultural environment. And, I lived in parts of Melbourne and I lived in Sydney, but it wasn't until I moved to Flemington that I really sort of got to know people from other cultures and learnt about cultures and the things that bind people together, which are mainly, language and shared experiences. But I think it's sort of enriched this whole area. Of Flemington was a very, basically a very working, Anglo working class area. Then there was a lot of Italians came in and some Greek as well. But it's just enormous over the years. I mean, the first wave of African migration to Flemington was 30 years ago. So it's just, I think we all learn from each other, and I think it's really important that people learn and about their own culture, even Australian culture. You just take it for granted, and when you're the dominant culture, and learn how other people can enrich your culture and how the dominant culture can embrace so many other cultures as well. So it's been an absolute joy to me to have been able to live in such a diverse and dynamic, changing area. And I think it's the same for everyone around here. The people who stayed, obviously, for a long time, have gotten used to so many other cultures and integrating those cultures, and accepting. And sometimes that hasn't been easy, and not just Australians and other cultures from overseas. It's often some cultures who've been here longer aren't quite as accepting as new cultures coming in. But I think in the end, we're very much here to promote the values of multiculturalism, to support people in improving their lives, to give opportunities to people from any culture with any sort of background, whether it's a physical, intellectual disability, whether it's a mental health issue, whether it's homelessness, transitional housing, low levels of literacy, whether you're an older adult. We're here for our community. And whoever those people in our community are, we're here to certainly promote their wants and needs, and do as much as we can to address them.
The richness of multiculturalism in especially the western suburbs and places like Flemington, it's just wonderful to see. And the way I look at these sort of issues is, humanity, and we all want the same thing. We all want growth and respect and all the basics of life, and to get on with life and to have a better future for our children. So and I do some work with the Foundation House in Victims of Torture, and I've spoken to a few professionals in the area, and the people really talk about, really things of humanity. Like, they talk about boyfriends, and they don't want to talk about the trauma necessarily. They want to speak about moving on and having those good relationships. So it's really interesting. This particular professional found it really interesting as to the actual topics that the ladies want to speak about. Yeah, so it just goes to show, when you sort of have the option of, choice and control over your life, people surprise you. So as an academic, you might come in with one view, but then the conversation goes to a whole different area of, that you didn't really expect. And these are conversations that are good to have with people who have experienced trauma in their lives, to respect their choice and control of how they want to go about their life. Yeah, so Gulay, would you like to add to that at all?
I'm considering, I'm looking at how we could all, people viewing us as well, like how can each one of us nurture society. There's lots of areas, like you mentioned, trauma and other things. As individuals, we can do a lot, and as a community, we can do much more. So it's trying to, I guess, bring that together and support that kind of community strength and cross communities as well, to make them a lot more, like I said earlier, about empowerment and empowering people to live the lives that they want to live. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to add to wrap it up, Cathy, at all?
Well, I think inclusion is the big, is the key focus of Farnham Street, to include people from any area of our community. So I think, you know, the neighbourhood house sector has really, you know, like it's the focus of every neighbourhood house and so many wonderful community organisations that exist. But I guess it's that whole thing of not recognising a disability, recognising the person and the needs they have, and how to include them as best as possible into our programs is definitely our key focus.
Well, Cathy, thank you for your time.
That's okay.
I hope that I hope that the audience get a lot out of these interviews. So part of the reason we conduct YouTube sessions is to empower people from a cold background with disabilities, and education is a key central part of that initiative. And you know, internet that has become an alternative to providing education. So thank you for your time.
Mm-hmm.
We have to do some key things. We forgot to do Welcome to Country, so we'll do that. And we'll thank our funding bodies. So you can hang around, Cathy, if you wish, or you can leave.
Oh, just because it's start of term and busy, I'll get going. Thank you. But lovely to be on the program, and thanks for asking me.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks for your time. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Colette, could you make me co-host, please?
To be honest.
So the top right, you'll have a couple of boxes come up, and the actual dots, you click that and you make me co-host, and it'll come up.
Yes.
We're all learning together. Beautiful. Let's have a look at this. Okay. Can you see that, Colette?
Yes.
Acknowledgement of country, which is usually done at the start, but we had technical issues, so we'll do it now. D&D Your Life, Your Voice project acknowledges traditional owners of land to which we work and live. I recognise the continuing connection to land, water and community. We pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. And we also remember all advocates who have worked hard over the years for the rights for themselves and other people with disabilities and human rights for all. Nothing about us without us. And now we do the funding arrangements. So D&D Your Life, Your Voice project would like to thank the MRC manager for their support they give to the D&D Your Life, Your Voice project. This project is funded by the Victorian DHHS and Moreland City Council. D&D would like to thank them for providing funding to this progressive out-of-the-box project, especially in these times living through the pandemic. COVID-19 has been difficult for people with disabilities being in isolation, and this channel is for them too. And then the next sessions will provide some information and support relating to COVID-19. And so COVID-19 will be under control for in the foreseen future. So so that's a great outcome for all the scientists and the community involved. And we'd like to thank our guest speaker for today. This project would like your ideas on what NUS topics and guest speakers who would like Your Life, Your Voice to explore. Please feel free to email us on dndyourlifeyourvoice@gmail.com. And when we're live, it would be nice if people have questions and we could try and answer your questions live on air. So, just to end the session, thank you, Gulair, for your time and effort.
Thank you too,
And,
Julie.
yeah, so it's been a baptism of fire for both of us. And we'll see everyone in 2 weeks for the second episode of Your Life, Your Voice. Thank you very much.
Thank you.